And what we'll cover today is what the Big Solar Co-op is and why it's needed, or why we think it's needed, a little bit about how we work and our solar sites, who we are, and how you can join us and invest. So this question, why hasn't every big roof got solar, is kind of a founding text, really, of Big Solar Co-op. It's a thing that got us started. And this comes from conversations we're having with people all around the country. I've been working with community solar organizations since community solar in the UK really began. Um, and everybody down the pub or in the back of a village hall is saying, I know a building which has got a big roof, uses a lot of energy, and doesn't have solar. Why hasn't it got solar? Going out a little bit and looking at the bigger picture in the UK, you can see there's some really good news in these kind of charts. This is from a lovely website called grid.imkate.com. A person called Kate, who's created a really great resource for looking at grid statistics. And you can see this big story here. Coal has completely disappeared from our electricity generation. Hooray. Wind is doing quite well. And here's solar. So it's doing okay, but as you can see, not spectacular. It's increasing. And if we break that down by scale, we get a very interesting picture here. We can see that there was a point in the early 2010s when really solar deployment was kicking off really, really fast. No prizes really for guessing why that was. This was the era of feed-in tariffs. And I've split it down here into three different scales. So 0 to 50 kilowatt, that's domestic and small commercial rooftops. This yellow one is medium scale commercial up to small ground mount systems. And this 5 megawatt green line is really large scale solar. Almost all of that would be ground mount solar fields. And you can see that all of these scales took a big hit at the end of a feed-in tariff subsidy scheme, but they've kind of recovered. So large scale solar is starting to get built at scale again. Domestic solar has picked up in a rather nice curve here. But one thing that really hasn't picked up very fast is this scale, 50 kilowatts to 5 megawatt. That's every big roof, and that's quite a lot of small scale ground mount systems. They're not really being built very much. We obviously do see some of them being built, but it's not huge in the UK at the moment. And that's really where we're working. So what isn't getting built? Rooftop solar on commercial buildings, factories, rooftop solar on community buildings, so schools, hospitals, and the like. And then ground mount solar. So while some people are building very, very big ground mount schemes, often somewhat controversial, relatively few people are building smaller scale ground mount schemes either. So the question is, why not? And there are loads of reasons why this isn't happening at scale in the UK, but one of them is it's quite complicated. So if somebody's got a building and thinks about putting solar on it, they often find out that it's a little bit more complicated than they might have thought. So that's difficult. And it leads to the next thing, which is who to trust. Who do I go to and work with to get solar installed? That's a major issue because I think there's a trust issue for solar to some extent. That solar installers are maybe seen as potentially untrustworthy. In some cases, maybe that's justified. The vast majority are fine, but there's a perception thing there. And then this last one, which is maybe surprising to some people, return on investment not high enough. This really, you can see this happening in when you speak to people in businesses and they say, we looked at solar, it had a 6 or 7 year payback. And you say, well, that was great. Why didn't you do it? And they say, we often have this conversation. We went to the board, and the board say if it doesn't have a 3 year payback, we won't even look at any investment proposition. Or even we've heard if it doesn't have an 18-month payback. So I mean, solar doesn't have an 18-month payback or even a 3 year payback, realistically. So very often we're talking to people in organizations who would love to see solar on their roof, but they can't get it past the board. So what we do as Big Solar Co-op, we build and own solar PV on other people's buildings. So we sell them the electricity it generates. Anything that they don't use goes to the grid. and they get a low and fixed price over a long-term agreement, which, unless they choose to buy us out, it will go on for 30 years. That's a familiar model. I'm sure pretty much everybody on this call has come across versions of this in the past. And so what we're trying to do really is answer the issues that we identified before. So it's complicated, but in this case, we own and run the solar. We figure out all the difficulties with the grid or with types of rooftop or all the other issues there. So we decomplicate it for people. The trust issue, I mean, we're a not-for-profit entity and we're a carbon first entity. And those things get us through the door with a lot of people who it's a novel approach. So we're not coming in as a kind of very salesy kind of organization. We're coming in as an organization with a different set of priorities, which means that we, even earlier on, when we first started, I was quite surprised how relatively easy it was to have conversations with building owners. And then, yes, the return on investment may not be high enough for corporate investors, but for our source of funds is predominantly members of the public, perhaps some people here today, buying shares or buying bonds for a fair return on investment, and not seeking, huge returns. So we can make this work financially in a way that some commercial models can't. One thing I should mention while we're on the subject is ethical solar. So that's something that's very important to us. If anybody's interested in the human rights aspects of solar and the solar supply chain, this report and its follow-up, as far ago as 2019, is still a required reading, documenting, a co-location of solar production facilities with forced labor camps in Xinjiang in China. And we have always paid a bit more for our solar panels, and solar panels where we can satisfy ourselves that they're not implicated in that trade. Looking at our business model, this is a sort of nominal projection for 2028. I'm putting up 2028 because at the moment we're in a ramp up phase where our economics don't look exactly like they will by then, but this is more characteristic of what we think the organization will look like in the future. So almost all our income comes from electricity sales, tiny bit of other income from the sale of things like green certificates, but it's minuscule really. We have a certain amount of operating, so that's income, expense on this side, certain amount of operating expense. That's mostly things like, insurance, cleaning panels, service and maintenance. We've got core costs of running an organization, most of which are our staff. There's depreciation of the solar panels. We've got a risk factor, so we make some provision for the fact that some of the buildings we'll put solar on belong to businesses that they might go bust, or they might move, or they might change their use. And then our biggest cost is the cost of finance, which we think roughly the money that we need is going to come half from shares and half from bonds in this model. And then, yes, we might make a small amount of surplus. If we do, we're a not-for-profit, the surplus gets reinvested in new solar. And what that means in practical terms is where we find sites where we'd like to put solar, but they don't add up financially, generally because they're too small, we could lower the bar a little bit, and which would be great. So if we made a larger surplus, we could maybe start doing more solar on places like village halls or doctor surgeries, these smaller places that could benefit from solar but don't stack up financially at the moment for us. So these are our operational sites. I had some fun earlier today updating this because I realized that my map is starting to get a little bit crowded. And you can see it was a real mix. I mean, we're mostly around the Midlands. We've started to build some further north, and we've got lots of projects we're looking at in the north and in the south as well. Largely, there are quite a few existing community solar entities in the south, and in other places like South Wales. and we have a policy of not competing with others where there are well-established organizations. So we're filling the gaps to some degree. And this is a whole mix of different types of place. So, for example, EcoPack is a big packaging company. Hornsey Steels make steel things. We've got quite a few cooperative stores here. There's a community centre. Switch House Hotel is a hotel. Um, Medical centre, that is a doctor's surgery in Birmingham. So you can see a range of different types of building that we've put solar on. And this gives you some idea of, only goes up to the middle of last year, but we started off early in 2024 with a small amount of generation and a few sites. Each color is a new site adding on. And as you can see, last year we added a large number of new sites. We're growing pretty quick. In fact, that's another view of the same thing, but on an annual basis. So our first solar went in 2023, late in 2023, and 2024 we added a few more. 2025 we've added a lot more sites, and well, 2026 is young, but actually our projection is for our total generation for 2026 to be over 4 megawatt for. Am I getting the numbers right here? 4,000 kilowatt hours. So I think I've got that number wrong. 4,000 megawatt hours. So 4 times the height of this column. One thing we do for the sites is that we can monitor it quite closely, and you can see this is Twigs, which is a steel stockholder in Derbyshire. And so at the moment I took this screenshots, 40 odd kilowatts were coming in from the sun, 17 was being used on site, 24 was going out to the grid. And you can also see how this goes over a day. So at night there, they're using a small amount of power. It's coming from the grid. The sun comes up and they're using solar power. People come into work, they switch everything on, and suddenly they're back into grid power. But as the sun continues to rise, on this day, large chunks of their usage are being covered by the sun. And that's fairly typical for a spring, summer, or autumn day on that site. If you're interested, there's also a live counter on our website. Won't be showing anything at the moment because it's dark, but it shows you live production here, and you can also see the mix of where that's going, whether it's being used on site or going to the grid. And so 2026, this map is actually the sites that we're looking at. Many of these we will certainly not be building in 2026, but that's to give you an idea of a kind of scale of sites that are coming to us and that we're analysing. We aim to build between 1 and 2 a month in 2026, and typically they're rooftop solar sites between about 30 kilowatts to some of them are very big, bigger than 1 megawatt. And a lot of it, we're going to continue with our policy really of having a wide range of rooftops. So we're not really trying to prioritize one type over another. If we can put solar on it and it makes sense, we'll do it. So as you can see, leisure centre, a school, there's a golf club, a care home, and other industrial sites, and a charity. I mentioned earlier briefly our connection with Mid Counties Cooperative, which is quite an interesting one. They're a cooperative retailer, so they have co-op stores, and we've built 6 sites with them. We're going to build 3 more in the first quarter of this year. They're in the middle of a big merger, as some of you might know at the moment, so we're having a little bit of a pause to let them do that, but we'll hope to do more sites with them in the future. And that's interesting because it's great to work with another cooperative, and it's also doing something which perhaps some types of community energy organisations, it's quite hard for them to do if they're very regionally based. But we were able to go to mid counties who have stores all over the Midlands and say, yeah, okay, we'll do as many as as many as are available. We don't mind where they are. There's a couple we've built, Bloxwich, Daventry, Church Stretton. We're actually on site at the moment. They're building that one. And I like this slide because these are kind of humdrum buildings, aren't they? In a sense, you look at these and think they don't necessarily make the pulse quicken, but they are buildings that we're all really familiar with in our communities. They have big roofs, we know they have large energy usage, and somehow in 2026, 2025, 2026, these buildings don't have solar yet. So that's kind of the most pure example of what we're trying to do here. Get the big buildings that need solar and stick solar on them. This was a nice one, Hornsey Steels in Shropshire, where they actually made their own roof because they make steel things, and then we've covered it in solar. I think that looks pretty good. This is a very interesting site that we worked on, Shropshire Hills Discovery Centre in Craven Arms in Shropshire as well. As you can see, it's a rather attractive kind of yin yang style roof, and we've put solar on it, and that solar will coexist with the turf roof there, which is going to be, I mean, at the moment it's winter, so it doesn't look so beautiful, but it's going to be quite an interesting install and one that was quite challenging for our tech team. This is one upcoming. We're going to start on this in a couple of weeks' time. Lench's Trust in Birmingham, and they are well, they're actually were founded in, it says here 1525, so they've been around for a little while as an almshouses, and they continue to do the same kind of work. So we provide sheltered housing. So a wonderful place to be able to offer solar to, and we can save them, tens of thousands a year on their fuel bills. We've also, so I mentioned earlier that we like to collaborate with other community energy organizations. We've also been approached by some who were founded a long time ago, haven't built anything much since or anything since, and wanted to find somebody else to take on their solar. So we've done that for two co-ops in Leominster, in Herefordshire, and we're also doing a similar arrangement for a Power for Good co-op in Birmingham, who have free church-based sites. So that was voted for by their members in these cases, and in almost all of their members have now become members of Big Solar Co-op. Here's another project that has taken up a lot of our time over the last year. So in general, we haven't been focusing on ground-mounted solar. There are a lot of reasons that some ground-mount solars are controversial and some concerns that we share. But we were always open to one that we thought dealt with some of those issues. And this site came up. This is on a former open cast mine. So until the 60s, this was all a large open cast coal mine. It was filled in and became very low grade agricultural land. And so we're able to use that land to generate electricity, but also we have a biodiversity plan where we can increase the biodiversity of this site significantly. The other fun thing we're doing here is some of these panels will be second life, so there'll be second-hand panels effectively, which is as far as we're aware, a UK first. You can see here, this map shows you the area of open cast mining, the blue area, and this red line is where our solar park is. And on the right, you can see some horses on the site. So that's the kind of usage that the site had before we started to develop solar there. This is a picture of Richard, who's working on the project, and myself on site a couple of months ago. As you can see, we're doing quite well in getting it built. So we've finished our phase one. We've got the grid to site is there. We need to get the transformer hooked up and get this generating by March. And then we're going to start working on the phase two, where we're going to install our second life panels. And I think it's worth saying that we'll continue to look for ground mount solar sites where we think there's a real justification. We're not going to go in to randomly building huge ground mount solar, particularly where on agricultural land. That's not something that we're up for. But where it makes sense, we'll continue to explore possibilities of doing it. So who are we? This is a picture taken at one of our gatherings 2 years ago in Derby. So we have two types of members. We have volunteer members, people who come and give us our time. We've got over 100 of those from all around the UK. And they do various things. Some of them do solar design, some of them volunteer on our board. We have people who help us with promotion, and also people who are sort of site champions. So they have an idea, and if any of you have an idea of a potential solar site, and ideally are willing to go and talk to them, then we can work with you to get solar built there. And that's how several of our sites have come about. This is something from last year. Theo, who had just finished his GCSEs at this point, was looking for work experience, and we thought let's see how far we can get with a 16-year-old in a week. And so on Monday, taught him how to use design software. He designed a solar array on his local sports centre. And Tuesday, we worked with him to improve his design. Wednesday, we did a financial model. Thursday, this is him actually presenting it to the managing director at the site. And on Friday, he produced a paper to go to their board of trustees. So that, I mean, that was great, and really illustrates what we're trying to help people to do. So if people want to get solar built locally, we've got the tools to help them go and really push that forward. We haven't built this one yet. They haven't agreed yet, but we're continuing to try. And then I mentioned two types of members. The other type is investor members, so people who've put some money in. We've raised over 2.4 million so far from over 1,000 investor members, and again, they're spread all across the UK, and indeed a few from some other countries. In structural terms, we're a cooperative society. We're not a company. We're a society registered directly with the Financial Conduct Authority. In common with other co-ops, voting power doesn't depend on shareholding. Our volunteer members ultimately have 75% of the vote. Investor members have 25%, but if they wish to, they can become volunteer members by giving their time. We have a board elected from our membership. We have a staff team of 5 with various specialties. And we work with a lot of other partners, including technical partners, legal services, marketing, and other kinds of services there. One that I will pick out is Share Energy, who some of you will know of. I also co-founded Share Energy. And Share Energy is an organization which was founded in 2011 to help people set up community energy societies across the technologies. And really, the whole Big Solar Co-op idea originated within Share Energy, and we remain very closely aligned. Share Energy continues to provide services to Big Solar Co-op. And we're closely linked and benefit from the experience that Share Energy has. And then we've had several funders over the years who have provided mostly startup grants. So this grant funding is now largely at an end, but all those people provided some funding to help us get started, and we're very grateful to them. So I've mentioned how many new sites we've got. We've got a lot of sites coming through, so we need to raise quite a lot of money. And the main ways we do that is through shares, bonds, or loans. Going back to front, really, in loans terms, we've had a few relatively small loans from bridging loans here, and a loan guarantee in one case that we didn't take up from Unity, and some bridging loans from an organisation called We Have the Power, which have enabled us to build some of the sites that I've spoken about. All of those are paid back now. We've got medium-term lending from Resonance, who are a social lender, and we've drawn down some of that at the moment. And in the long term, we will probably look to borrow money from somebody else, another lender, at a larger scale as we grow, but we haven't got anything in place there yet. The share offer is really the kind of fundament of our fundraising efforts. And it's always rolling. We keep our share offer going all the time. I think it's worth just talking briefly about the difference between company shares. People are often relatively familiar with company shares, but not so familiar with the type of shares we have, society shares. There's a difference in purpose. So company shares are, nominally at least to make money, and ours are to make solar happen. There's a different bottom line. Share value in companies often goes up and down, and the value of one share in a society normally stays the same. There's a difference in the way we think of return. So the return that shareholders get in the company is a share of the profits. In our for our shares, the return is, we call it an interest payment, and that's the kind of official name of it for a society. It's a payment for providing capital. The difference being that if we became wildly profitable, then a company would split that money between its shareholders. But in our case, we would reinvest our extra profits in new solar rather than giving it as extra interest to our members. Generally, company shares are only really available to sophisticated investors. It's relatively hard to go in and directly buy shares in most types of company, whereas society shares we can sell them direct to members of the public, and that's a legislative difference. In risk terms, I mean, the risks of any kind of shareholding are fundamentally that you could lose everything you put in, and that's the same, across any kind of body. We're not that's not something that can't possibly happen with us. I would say that as a business, we're a very different type of business from most. We do one thing, we put solar up, and therefore most of the money that comes for our shareholders goes into tangible assets on rooftops, which means that we're a significantly lower risk organization. But technically, yes, you can in theory lose your capital. Anybody over 16 can buy shares. The minimum is 100 quid, and we've got plenty of £100 members. The maximum is 100,000. I'd love to say we've got plenty of £100,000 members, but we don't. But we do have several people who have invested 20, 30, £50,000. And buying shares makes you an investor member. That's the connection there. You can pay by that bank transfer or check. And if you go on our website, there's a big button which you can click to buy shares. We pay interest payments annually. And our aim is to pay a fair rate of interest, which we define as 2% above the bank base rate. If the base rate falls below 3%, our target stays at 5%. And that interest is payable after one full year. So we basically need to use the money to go and build some solar, and the solar has to go out and generate some income before we can pay interest. So there's a gap between investment and first interest payment there. Interest could be paid out. If you want to have your interest paid straight to you, you can do so, or you can reinvest. So you can choose to have your interest reinvested as new shares. So all the details are in our share offer document, which is on our website. It's due for an update. It's the one that's on there at the moment is reasonably old, and we're updating it at the moment, but the terms won't change. You can ask to withdraw shares if you need to withdraw them. That's ultimately at the director's discretion. But our aim is to allow withdrawals wherever possible. And when people have asked us to date, all requests have been met because people's circumstances change and they want their money back, understandably. You can't buy shares for children, and that's really to do with the complicated legislation around child protection there. shares can be inherited and they are exempt from inheritance tax up to the cap. So that's of interest to some people. And the interest is taxable, but if you have a small amount of investments, then your personal savings allowance means that you can get interest without paying tax on it up to a threshold. It varies by different people, but some of our members don't need to pay any interest for that reason. We've also run a bond offer last year. Some of you might have seen we raised 1.8 million. That's the bonds are somewhat different. They're fixed term, fixed interest. We don't have one at the moment. Reasonably likely we will run another bond offer in the future, but we don't have concrete plans to do so at the moment. If you look on our website, you might be interested in this. We've got a little impact calculator, so you can move the slider to see how many shares you might want to buy and look at, what the impact of that might be. One thing that I was quite pleasantly surprised by really when we did the calculations was that, £1,000 worth of shares is on average enough to push enough gas generated electricity off the grid to be equivalent to about 5% of the average personal carbon footprint in the UK. So that seems like quite a good use of funds if you've got them. So that's it from me on that front. Of course, we're going to go into a Q&A in a second, and I'll stop the recording. But you can please always drop us an email at info@bigsolar.coop. Lots of people do with complicated questions. They're always really, really welcome, and we answer everything that's asked of us. So please don't hesitate to ask questions that are specific to your situation or your interests. Right, I'm going to stop recording now. If I can figure out how to do that. Stop recording.